I still have an active Lyft account. So I drove for Uber and Lyft for almost 6 years. I still do it on occasion. My first 2 years in office, I did.
Hello, Mayor Konstantine Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you on this rainy Southern California day?
What is with our weather? You're the mayor. Do you have any say in the weather?
I can call a guy.
Okay, call the big guy. I like the rain. I was walking down the street and I heard these millennials complaining. Ugh, finally that crappy, awful rain is over. That's part of life, right? Rain, sun. We have a drought.
Yeah, we just got to roll with the punches, I guess. But, climate change is making it difficult all over.
I agree. I don't mind some rain. So I'm happy to be inside, cozy, talking to you today. You are such a surprise to me. You're like a gift that I opened. And when I first asked you, first of all, to be on the podcast, I saw that we were both friends of Adam Schiff. And so you had a picture with Adam and I had one the same day, and I was like, oh, 6 degrees of separation. We must be, rooting for the same team. So I was curious about you, and I went to your Instagram, and you were so nice to respond to me. And the deeper I looked, the gift was that you're an actor. I had no idea. I mean, Diary of an Actress, I thought I was talking to a politician only, and you've been an actor for 30 years. Tell me how you manage the two.
Yes, not quite 30 years. So
20 years, 10 years?
I started in high school, so about 25 years ago.
Okay.
And, I fell in love with live theater and really got involved with a little thing called improv comedy.
Mm-hmm. I know it well.
I did that in high school. I did that throughout most of my 20s and 30s. I became very involved with an organization known as Comedy Sports. Mm-hmm. And they have a couple dozen franchises across the country, even in England. And it's a wonderful, live theater, comedy improv show that is really great with teaching folks the skills of yes and, the skills mm-hmm. of team building, communication, and how to, just not take life so seriously.
Okay.
And through them, I found Groundlings and Second City, Improv Olympic, all manner of comedy outlets that I got involved with and excelled in, and I really loved it. And then I moved into acting professionally, got my SAG card, did television and film for a long time, and then sort of fell into politics. But it seems adjacent because I'm the mayor of Burbank, which is,
the media capital of the world.
Exactly. So I feel at home here.
Okay, there's so many things I want to unpack because I really intersect with politics and entertainment. The first thing I want to say is you were very happy. You were doing your thing. You were doing improv. You were teaching improv, and then you had the calling to serve.
Yeah, it wasn't really a calling so much as a request.
A literal request?
Yeah, so in 2016, I was working on my, social media profile. Because if you're a comedian and you want to make it big, you got to have jokes on Twitter and stories on Instagram and all that stuff, mm-hmm. and memes on Facebook, right? Like, that's the whole thing. So I was doing all that, and I got recruited to do social media work for someone running for president at the time. And I was very excited. And
I can guess who that was. Yes.
I could randomly tell you. You could probably guess. But we were very excited to have the campaign to, get the first female president in the United States. And all of us were very, very excited about what Hillary was bringing to the table and the things she was talking about, and very obviously worried about what the other guy was talking about, and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to focus on the negativity. So we talked about, the future and bringing good things to light and creating a more equitable country and all of that. And so for me, I thought my job was going to be over. I remember, the day before the election in 2016, we had gotten together with our other social media team members, and we were all talking about what are we going to do next, and what are we going to go back to after the election, after we win this thing and everything is fine.
Mm-hmm.
And my, turn around the around the dice was okay. Well, I'm going to go back into acting full time and get my comedy career back up and running again because I was working full time as an actor before then.
Wonderful.
But then the nightmare happened, and
Right.
I remember the next day I woke up after he won the election, and I sort of like just had a dream, and I jumped out of bed and I reached over for my phone and I looked up. I remember Googling the phrase Burbank City elections, and
Wow.
I thought to myself, this is important. I can do
Mm-hmm.
something locally to help the people that are going to be impacted by what's going to be happening in Washington, D.C. for the next 4 years. And wouldn't you know it, the applications to run for city council had opened 2 days prior.
Wow.
So we were in this moment of run for city council in Burbank,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this. This is the thing. Let's see what happens. And we were off to the races at that point.
And how many years later did you become mayor?
Well, so I ran for that race in 2016 and lost spectacularly. It was really fantastic how terribly I lost. Mostly because I had no idea what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't know how to fundraise, didn't know how to do outreach, didn't know grassroots campaigning, didn't know organizing. I didn't know any of that stuff. I ran again in 2020, about 4 years later, and won that seat. And that was a 4-year term. And so I was a city council member. And then they upgraded me while I was in my term to vice mayor. And then just 2 months ago, they upgraded me again, and I became mayor of the city of Burbank.
Wow.
So I'm still in my first
Congratulations.
term, technically. Thank you.
Congratulations. How wonderful. Uh, I imagine your good sense of humor, the way you can laugh at life, has helped you become a politician. I'm wondering, how do your constituents like it, knowing you're an actor?
So, as you can guess, a lot of people who live in Burbank work in the film and television industry. We have a lot of the IATSE unions are based here. We have a lot of major studios based in Burbank. And so when I talk to my constituents, and even when I was campaigning asking for their vote, um, most of them work in the industry. And so I'm able to talk to them about their jobs. I'm able to talk to them about what's going on at work, how their
Mm-hmm.
industry is treating them, the things that they like to do on the weekends when they have that one day free. Because if you know the industry,
Right.
you work 6 days a week, 12-hour days. And so when you
Amazing.
get free time, it's either one day a week and you're exhausted and you just want to do something locally. So how do we
Mm-hmm.
create a vibrant community where people don't have to travel very far to go grocery shopping and do something important and run errands and have nice schools locally. But then, in addition to that one day off, what happens is you work for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and then you have a 2 or 3 month break before your next job. So then, how do we support the local economy with people who have large breaks between work? So, understanding that from my own personal history and work background, it really
Mm-hmm.
helps me with the legislative efforts that are going on in the city and how we build a Burbank that is catering to the needs of its constituents.
Mm. Wonderfully said. My mind is racing. I've worked in Burbank a lot. I've worked at the Animation Guild. I've worked at a lot of the animation studios, and it's fascinating to me how much you have there, how rich it is. Uh, do you find that your political work keeps you busy full time, or are you still auditioning?
So the political work does keep me busy all the time. And I don't necessarily audition anymore, but I do get offered roles randomly because people
Nice.
know I'm an actor. So it's weird. I mean, I don't have to audition anymore, which is
That's so
nice to
much
say as
better.
an actor. Yeah, but
Right.
also it's not the kind of roles I would go out for anyways. It's
Are
like,
they
hey, do
politicians?
this. It's stuff like, can you do this PSA for a group that we're talking about, to prevent drunk driving in high school? I'm like, okay, great. Can you do a thing for my friend who's in politics, but it's only going to be seen by a handful of us, and you can play a character? I'm like, okay, great. It's like stuff like that. I was gonna say, I have a thing coming up where I'm being asked to play the mayor of Burbank for a comedy sketch where the people who are in it
Wow.
don't know what the mayor does, and so they're doing goofy stuff, and I have to play the straight man. Like, that's not my job. Silly stuff like
Oh,
that.
funny. Very funny. It's good you can laugh at yourself. I mean, don't you think it's beautiful when art and purpose cross? It's
Oh yeah.
what could be better? I mean, I teach acting and I'm trying to instill that in my students that your life can be about something. You can use those acting skills to do something in the world. And you are the prime example. I should have you come in if you'd be so nice and talk to my actors, but you are the prime example of someone who has done that. And whether it was by accident or purpose, you're doing it and you're balancing it. And I get the feeling that you don't feel like you gave something up to do what you're doing.
So
Is
I
that true?
actually came up. I came up through the ranks in the improv comedy world right during a time where this new way of thinking sort of manifested in that industry, and it's
Mm.
called applied improv. And for most people, improv is something you do on stage with a bunch of people that you're making jokes and doing silly stuff. But what's come out in the last 10 to 15 years has been this idea that the skills you learn doing improv, doing comedy, doing live theater, doing that presentational aspect, the team building, the yes and, the understanding with your teammates, all of that can be used in real life scenarios.
Hmm.
It's team building anywhere that there's a team. And I have found that politics at its best is a collaborative effort. And so I'm able to use my improv training every single day when I'm talking to people about, well, what legislation do we need to move forward? What compromises can we find? And then taking those ideas and telling them to the public. And now I get to use my public speaking ability. Now I
Hmm.
have, tons of scripts that I need to say out loud on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter, and this whole idea of disseminating public information from the government to the people, I have found is really, a core strength that I have now to bring that out to the community.
That's so fantastic. And if it's not going right, you just throw in a yes and to keep the conversation going when they want to give you a hard no. But
Right.
yes and.
Yeah,
Right? It
you'd be
works.
surprised. Yeah.
It works. So I'm not sure whether you're aware that I do train politicians in public speaking. But I like to say I train them in experiencing. I teach the Strasberg technique. Have you had any connection with Strasberg's work yet?
Yeah, so
You
I
have.
took a couple of Strasbourg classes. Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so I've done a lot
Okay,
of training. I did Strasbourg, I did Meisner, I've done Stanislavski. Um, yeah, so I have my
you,
basics down.
you
I
got your
can
chops.
do the
Good.
work. Yeah.
Great. So I know the answer to this, but you do feel that politicians can be trained, whether you're using improv. Do you do you know
Well, it's not so
you
much a
might
training. I would say that basically what you're doing is you're giving them the skills that are necessary to do their job effectively. So, I
Mhm.
mean, training to be an actor is one thing, right? That's another level, right? But yes, you can absolutely train anybody to become a public speaker, to become, someone who can give those kinds of confident and informative speeches that honestly the public really needs from our elected officials. We need to be able to trust that what is going on behind the scenes is reflective of what we see in front of the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good of a legislator you are or a governor that you are. If you can't communicate those successes to the community at large, you're always going to be seen as someone who's not being effective, even though technically you might be.
You might be. Agreed, agreed, agreed. And so, what I like to train is that authenticity bone. I mean, you could have the authenticity in your body, but if you can't express it because of tension or because you've never professionally learned how to relax and allow yourself to come through. So, dealing with tension, do you have issues like that, or did the comedy improv take care of that for you?
Well, I've gotten through all of that personally. Like, I don't deal with those things anymore, but there are often times where I'm asked to do speaking engagements with other either elected officials or more commonly individuals who either work in the public sector or a nonprofit or even a private sector, and they're being asked to now participate in a public speaking engagement or working on whatever issue we're talking about. And it's sort of my job to take care of them in that moment. For example, right now we have a lot of the rains that are happening, and trees are falling down all over Southern California. And people are asking me, okay, who do we talk to? How do we get, the folks involved at the public works to deal with these issues? And so for me, if a press conference is called, we're going to have to pull up, someone from our public works department, our arborist, the people who work behind the scenes, who are now being asked, okay, there's a microphone in front of you. Now you need to talk to the public. And how do I, as the mayor, stand with them and help them through the question and answer period? How do I ask them real easy answerable questions? How do I take the information they're giving and translate it for the public? All of those things, it's like another level of teamwork and cooperation and understanding what the public needs in that moment. I mean, you treat them like an audience. When you're in a live audience and on the theater, you know that there's a certain level of expectation. People sitting in the audience, they want to see. And so you've got to be able to get that from the people that you're on stage with or on the microphone with behind the podium to the folks who are there asking.
Huge responsibility to now not only present yourself, but to help them along. Okay, so fascinating. These things that you're mentioning in terms of what you just said, I just want to circle around to that someone may seem like they're not efficient and they may be doing their job, but if they can't communicate that, people will think they're not efficient. I think people listening to that, we should have an appreciation for people who run for office who don't have this kind of training. I'm trying to change that. You're trying to change that. And there is definitely a need for that. So I'm happy to, again, hear some proof of that. I want to talk about some unusual things about you that make you very special. You were or are driving rideshare. Is that still true?
So yes, I still have an active Lyft account. So I drove for Uber and Lyft for almost 6 years. I still do it on occasion when I have some free time. I don't have much free time since becoming mayor. But my first 2 years in office, I did. And that was fun. And it's been a nice experience.
Did you campaign while you were doing it? Because what a wonderful opportunity. And
Sort
talk to
of.
Constituents?
Sort of. I campaigned before the official campaign opened. Yes, I was campaigning while I was driving. But
That is fantastic.
once I started knocking on doors, that was more efficient. So like I had to take time off and do the actual campaign.
Did you ever feel like you were undercover talking to people about what their issues were and collecting
Oh,
information that would help you
all
serve?
the time, all the time, all the time. I ask people, so what's going on with you? How's life? What's going on with work? Where's your commute? Tell me about what's happening with you. And people would just, it's funny. Like I tell everybody, if you have a really calm, engaged Uber or Lyft driver, people will just open up, because
Mm-hmm.
you're a complete stranger and they're never going to see you again. So I've seen people tell me all of their problems and just info dump for the 10-minute ride that we have.
I have
I'm like,
been that
okay.
person. Sometimes you make a super connection. I've
Mhm.
actually made one friend who was a driver. It's so wonderful. He always says, well, call me, if you need to go anywhere. So that's really unique about you. And I love the fact that you were okay with that you didn't feel like you couldn't take a job that someone outside of the political sphere would do. And
I
like
mean,
so
I
much
I was doing
respect.
that. I was doing that long before politics. You know, I started driving January 2015. A year
Hmm.
before I got into any of this, and I never thought once to even put it down. I thought, well, it's my job. I'll still keep doing it. It's not a problem.
Mm, wonderful. You've also been involved with legislation, right, for rideshare drivers to get benefits. Is that correct?
Yes, so I worked on the AB5 campaign. I have been organizing with Lyft and Uber drivers across California, and in fact, across the nation and multiple nations. I went to Europe this last year and talked to the European Parliament about how they treat Uber and Lyft drivers in the European Union
Wow.
and looking for workers' rights and protections over there.
How fantastic. So you are pro union, like myself, and you're a member, a brother in my union. How's the Screen Actors Guild doing? I'm on two committees, but there's been a lot of changes with COVID, and there's been a lot of changes with production. I
Mhm.
see the biggest change in commercials. Things aren't as good as they were. What's your general assessment of SAG?
Well, streaming is the big change. And I think the conversation that we're going to be having, this is just my guess,
Hmm.
on the next contract is how we guarantee um, runtime and run length on streaming shows. Because one thing that has been happening recently is these big streaming, empires, Disney Plus, Netflix, HBO
Mm.
Max, they're pulling old content that they've already negotiated contracts for and just removing them from their streaming site. And there's nothing in our contracts, there's nothing in the writers or directors or any of the other contracts to guarantee a length of time on when that piece of media stays active. It's only a maximum amount right now, right? So you buy the contract and it says, okay, you run until this, but there's no minimum guarantee. And so what's happening is these big streaming sites are pulling content, and that way nobody can access the thing that they have owned rights to, that they have a contract with, and
Hmm.
nobody can see the things that you and I are in, and so we're not
Hmm.
getting our residuals, and
Right.
so it's this loss of income, and it's a loophole that these streaming services have found. Well, if they don't want to pay residuals and copyright stuff and
They just
trademark
pull it.
stuff for all this old they just pull it.
They just yank it. And also, people aren't getting their producers aren't getting their money on airtime and airplay.
Mhm.
There's so
Yep.
many things wrong and so many things right with streaming. I mean, we all
Yeah.
reap the benefits, but I do not think the creators do.
No.
Interesting.
but
Can
but
you tell?
that's why
Yeah,
we renegotiate our contracts, right?
right. Exactly. We have power there. Tell me about tax incentives. Are you involved with our state? Are you involved with what happens in Burbank?
So we definitely push for that. So as a city, we can lobby our state and federal legislators, and obviously we're very much in favor of keeping the film and production tax credits here, not just in Burbank, but in all of Southern California to keep the jobs here locally.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we have seen happen is other states will vie for those production credits and those tax breaks, and they'll do so in very uneven stops and starts. And so what happens is you'll get 2 or 3 really good years in, say, Atlanta, Georgia, and then everyone moves over there, does a bunch of productions, a bunch of production houses start up, and then the tax incentives go away, and then everyone who's uprooted themselves to move there is now out of a job. But then what you
Mm.
have now is sort of a skeleton crew of a production studio in a state that's not California, and they're trying to just get by waiting for the next tax break or next tax incentive. And unfortunately, it creates a sort of fight between their location and what's happening here in Southern California, and they start to underbid and undercut the
Oh no.
wages and the prices.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get into a lowest bidding war, and it hurts everybody. And
It hurts
so,
everyone.
yeah.
Right. Oh, that's
So
that's
for
too
me,
bad.
the best way to prevent that from happening is to never lose the tax credits and incentives here, to make sure there's always those good tax breaks for productions, so that we maintain that sort of power base and everyone can negotiate and make sure the contracts are above par and all of that stuff here locally.
Good, good. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Appreciate that. Okay, I have you for a little bit longer. I know that um, you've been very public about being unhoused for a while, and as have a lot of actors, more than we know probably. And so, how do you come back from that, and how do you use that to help others?
Yeah, that's a really big issue right now, not just in Southern California, but across the country. We're seeing
Hmm.
huge numbers of unhoused folks getting priced out of their homes, not having, you know, good enough wages to pay for any type of housing. So it's an issue of jobs. It's an issue of housing creation. It's an issue of why are we not using tax money and federal and state money across the country to help people get housed?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it up to the individual every single time? And I'm not saying that people can't pull themselves up by the bootstraps and find a new place. It's just that it's very difficult. And so
Mm-hmm.
we need to create systems that help folks get housing. First and foremost, in places where housing is impacted, we need to build units. That's a simple supply and demand issue right there.
Is there space in Burbank to do much building?
Oh yes, we have a whole section on the north end of town that used to
Mm-hmm.
be major industry. About 30 years ago, we had Lockheed Martin, the giant defense
Of course,
contractor,
yes.
leave town. They left, they went to Maryland. And so we have all of this really great space up in the north part of our city that's just open industrial area. And we're not really doing production and manufacturing in that kind of way anymore in Burbank. It's mostly tech and media. And
Mm-hmm.
so the space needed for that new industry is not nearly as large. And so we have this opportunity to build housing. Let's do it. And in fact, a lot of places all over LA County have these really um, exciting opportunity sites where we can start to really build housing that's needed for everybody. But that's the supply side. What happens on the personal side is we need to create services that really help people who have been unhoused integrate back into society. If you don't know this, people who've been on the streets for more than 6 months, it starts to
Hmm.
become a mental health issue. The wear
Right.
and tear on your personal, psyche of living on the street really breaks you down. And so we need to have
Mm.
ways of integrating people back into society. We need to invest in job training, mental health. How do we get people healthy again? How do we get people the services that they require? I met a woman the other day who couldn't even get her social security checks mailed to her
Well,
because she didn't have a mailing address because she was unhoused. And she had thousands and thousands of dollars of social security checks waiting for her. And so how do
mm.
we just create a service where she can get a PO box?
I'm very honest with my students that I've struggled month to month to pay rent. And what help do we have? I mean, we do have some organizations like the Actors Fund.
Right.
Um,
And I've worked
since you
close with
are,
the Actors Fund and they're really
oh, you
great.
have.
But
Okay,
but
great.
they can only come in every so often. They're not an endless well of money. The biggest thing for me personally that I'm working on here in Burbank, we're moving forward as a city to create our first ever media jobs fair. And
Mm.
one of the things that got me through the hard times as an actor was all the other jobs that you can do instead of just simply auditioning every day and trying to get work on set. If you are an actor, you have all these other capabilities, right? You can
Skills. Most actors do, right? We're smart, we're
absolutely.
charismatic, right?
Mhm.
We think quickly. Hmm.
Yeah. And so for me, how do we get a hub together where everyone can come and see, okay, here are all the jobs in the media industry that are hiring. You can do, hosting for talk shows and game shows, stuff that's on late night cable that, very few people watch, but still has a good paycheck to it, right? How do
Mm.
you be a warm up comedian for a famous talk show that's already on the air? How do you get that job? How do you do script reading for production companies? Where do you go to? Maybe you don't want to do acting anymore. Maybe you want to go behind the camera. Maybe you want to work as a writer's assistant. All of these
Hmm.
jobs, it feels when you get off the bus and you show up in California and you're in Burbank, you're like, well, where do I go to apply for a job? You can just walk into a Starbucks and give your application like you can to an acting job, right? So I want to create a system where every year the studios, the production companies, the major unions come together and do sort of a job fair, teaching you how to write a resume, teaching you which applications to put in. Universal Studios and Disneyland can show up and say, look, if you want to be an actor, you can wear a costume and we'll pay you to be,
Right.
an actor.
Mickey
And so it's
Mouse.
like,
Right.
exactly, exactly. And, that kind of stuff is really key for me to get other people involved in. I worked, 3.5 years I worked at Universal Studios as one of the characters, and it got me
Oh, I
through.
love that.
So it's
Wow, I
important.
love that. Yeah, I've done every job under the sun, and only when I started teaching was I able to, 100% be in the creativity all the time, and I'm so grateful for that. But I did everything, and
Yeah.
I feel like that's how we form as people. I think all that life experience is very helpful for our acting, but it's exhausting, and the hours and the pay not always so great. I love this idea of a media fair. How close are you to making that happen?
Well, my hope is that I get to cut the ribbon on it while I'm still mayor. So hopefully before
Okay.
December.
Okay,
That's my
sign me
plan.
up if
That's
you
my
need
plan.
it.
We'll see what happens.
Sign me up. I'll volunteer. If you need some help, I'm on board.
Great.
I love that. I mean, that's really getting out of the problem into the solution. And
Because that was
feel
my
like,
problem. When I showed up
mhm,
to Burbank in 2004, I didn't know what to do.
right.
How do I make it in the industry? I had to figure it all out. And it took me a few years. And it's like, if I would have known what I knew now, then I would have hit the ground running.
I know. I agree. And I feel like it's our responsibility to pass that on if we can light the way for someone else because it's incredibly hard committing to being an actor. And there's nothing we'd rather do, but it's about survival. No one ever talks about that. They talk about how to get an agent or what kind of headshots you should get, but how do you mentally keep going? you
Yeah.
know and physically putting like food in your mouth. I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's almost embarrassing that people don't talk about it. Like there's some stigma to it when we know that probably what's the percentage of actors working in the union is outrageously small.
Mhm.
Did you watch the SAG Awards last night?
I haven't. I'm gonna watch it on replay.
Oh, good, good. Well, they were very generous, especially Jessica Chastain. She really like manifested that we would be working with her, and they were all very generous. The speeches, like, I see you, I know you're struggling.
That's great.
And so, one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because you're the mayor of Burbank, which means you're the mayor of entertainment. And you were picked, Konstantine, to help us all, right?
I'm
So
trying.
know that
I'm
you have
trying.
know that you have an actor friend in me, and that you can call upon me anytime. And it's been so much fun talking with you and hearing all the great things you're doing. Where do people find you? How do they follow you on social media?
I am on all the social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can just look up my name, Konstantine Anthony with a K. My handle on most of them is Konstantine in California.
Okay, fantastic. And I hope you're still using your comedy skills. I hope I'll see some funny things going to your social media.
We have fun at our city council meetings. When there's some lighthearted stuff, I keep it light.
Good. I'm sure you're a pleasure to be around. And I can't help but ask, but do you see this going further your political career and serving in a state capacity, possibly national?
I like to stay local, and in fact, I will likely make an announcement next month for another local seat, and you can keep your eyes open for that.
Okay, I will. I heard it here first. We heard it here first. Thank you. It's such a pleasure having you here today, and I look forward to staying in touch and wish you all the best.